Operations.
Maggie Barry.
Thank you, Mr Chair. To the imaginative and fanciful utterances of the member who just resumed his seat, where do we start? Cheap popularism. We were sort of laughing at the idea that this Labor group believe in expansive local government. Now, what does that translate to you? Expansive or expensive? There's nothing about what the last member said that will influence anyone. He witters on endlessly, much the same sort of phrases, no matter what bill he's talking about. But let's go back to Annette King, actually. She took one of the first calls in this debate, Mr Chair. Conspiracy theories abounded, of course. Crises upon crises. But what crises does she refer to? Apart from the ones in her own party around leadership, of course. But she was a person who dismissed the submitters, and I take exception to that. I take exception to the idea that all of the submitters thought like she did, that they were listening to the sort of evidence-based stuff. The opposition members have apparently ignored any evidence that doesn't actually agree with their prejudices, and I just cite one. For example, the New Zealand Chambers of Commerce submission. Now, Michael Barnett, the chairman of the Management Committee, represents the interests of 29 chambers of commerce nationwide. This, in turn, represents about 20,000 small and medium enterprises and some of the biggest businesses in the country. This is something the opposing forces don't listen to because it's not relevant. It doesn't fit the mould of their particular prejudices. But for those of them who didn't listen at the time, let's refresh our memory about what Michael Barnett said in general terms about this Local Government Act 2002 Amendment Bill. He, of course, thought it was very important for local government to recognise the very critical role that they play, that they are able to make in a competitive and productive economy through the delivery of efficient and responsive services. Now, these are the kinds of things that they want to encourage local government to do, and that's why they commended this piece of legislation. They strongly agreed with the bill's intentions and measures that required local government to focus on activities that cannot be provided currently by individuals, firms and voluntary groups, and that are not performed by central government. The whole idea of the four well-beings is nonsense, and they agreed with us that they have to go. They, of course, made the point that we've made many times over the past 5 or so hours around rates increases that have increased by an average of around 7% per annum since 2003, more than double the rate of inflation. Of course, they talked about local government debt that had quadrupled over the past decade from $2 billion to $8 billion. This has been touched on by many members on this side of the House in debating this motion today. There are 78 councils in New Zealand. The Local Government League table has identified 25% of them, around 30 of these 78 territorial authorities, classed as financially unsustainable. And that's according to a league table that was published last year. The report noted, and I'm quoting, over the last 10 years or more, councils' financial positions have deteriorated markedly. Their communities will soon be pressured with increases of council rates and charges that, if left unchecked, will reach unacceptably high and unaffordable levels. Now is the time to turn these circumstances around. We agree with that. So not only do we have 20,000 people involved in business who support this legislation, we are also told in a recent survey by the New Zealand Council for Infrastructure Development that around 80% of New Zealanders, that's people who live in this country, they don't dwell on planet Labour, Greens or New Zealand First, these are people who actually believe that the councils have lost focus and a majority support refocusing council roles, which is exactly what this legislation does. It will give councils more tools to keep debt down and rates affordable, something that is, of course, going to be lost forever and a day by the failed former mayor of North Shore, who pipes up unhelpfully from time to time. We see as well with the select committee that we had that there was an inability of opposition members on the select committee to work constructively together on the bill. And that has meant that this bill has come back to the House largely unchanged, and why we have this supplementary order paper, which I commend to the House. I think that this is a bill that definitely does provide clarity, efficiency and much more responsible financial management. It's long overdue. When this legislation first went through in 2002, National vowed to overturn it. We heard today from Moana Maki that in the unlikely event that she ever becomes powerful again in government and they take the Treasury benches, highly unlikely, not sure where she fell on the leadership struggle, she might find she's a bit further down the pecking order than she might like to be, that they will actually bring back the 4 well-beings. Now, if that's not the nail in their coffin, I would be surprised, because there are people in this country, Mr Chair,
Maggie Barry.
there are people in this country that do pay close attention to what goes on in this House and to what goes on in Select Committee. They identify clearly Labor is a party that has lost touch and doesn't listen. When we sat there on that Select Committee and heard the submissions and heard the quality of the utterances, taking away some of the more emotional stuff that some of the members have tried to do, the emotional rubbish around the 4 well-beings, the scaremongering from the theatre lovies and the others, who really have nothing to fear, because local authorities will be able to do what they feel they can do if it's economically sustainable. So I commend this SOP to the House in its entirety. Thank you, Mr Chair.
That was fantastic.
You're pulling at this one.
Moana Mackie.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Well, I'm pleased Maggie Barry has woken up and given us her speech on part